Hi printmakers, we're going to learn how to make our spiral book today. You can use your spiral book for a journal, diary, sketchbook, anything you want. So what you should have received in your kit is 2 different back and front pieces which are made of bookboard, and then a series of already pre-punched whole paper. There's probably about 10 to 15 sheets there. You also got a spiral somewhere in that kit, PVA glue, which is an archival glue, which means it will not yellow over time. You got a stencil brush, which has a really thick bristle, which helps with the glue. Your palette knife, which is going to help with the corners. X-Acto. Find a pencil, and then have some kind of scissors and a ruler around. I'm using my foam core again because it's a good surface to work from. So we're going to start by just understanding how you choose your paper and what size you need everything to be. So I'm going to start. Oh, I also have my ID here too for smoothing purposes. So I've already kind of looked through my papers. I'm going to use these 2 as my inside papers. I'm going to set those aside. And then I am going to choose these 2 as my front and back cover. And you can just set these aside for another book project. And basically you're going to flip each of them over so the back is facing upward. And then you are going to lay your front and back covers, as you can see here. And this we're going to lay right at the very edge of that section where the coil will go, as well as right here at the edge also. So I'm kind of centering it. So I have about an inch, and then I have a little bit of extra paper here, inch, and then some extra paper there. First thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up my glue, and I'm going to make sure that it's open inside. Yep, there is a little thing inside there, so just open that up for yourself so that you can squeeze the glue out. And then it looks like I need to trim the top just a little bit to allow the glue to come out a little bit faster. All right, so I'm going to just really easily kind of put the glue on here. And then your stencil brush, its job is to be able to spread this glue really, really smoothly across your entire surface. So I'm just going top to bottom. It doesn't matter if it gets on the paper because the paper will be glued to the surface of your book anyway. So I'm just spreading that glue out really evenly, making sure that I'm making it all the way to my edges. I grab a little from that side. You want the corners to really have a lot of glue because that's the part that will pull up really easily from your book board. So I'll just go like that. And then I'm going to just flip it over and actually lay it right down on there, making sure that I'm lining up the edge of my paper with the edge of those holes. The holes need to still be visible. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side, just smoothing that glue out, paying attention to those edges, and trying to avoid getting the glue in the holes. It's not the end of the world if it happens. The glue does dry clear, so you don't have to worry about it causing any issue. And then I will do the same thing. You'll notice that it'll start to kind of curve a little bit, the board, because it's picking up moisture. But because we're going to glue both sides, we won't have any problem here in a little bit. So I'm going to push that down just like that, making sure that it is adhering all the way around. Wonderful. Now, in order to get a really clean corner on your book, this is where the pencil comes in handy, except you know what, I'm going to use a Sharpie just so you all can see it better. I'm going to draw a little curve. What I've done is I've basically distanced my little curve about 1/4 inch from the corner, and that way it's not actually touching the corner. I'm going to do that on all 4 corners. And the reason that I don't want it to touch the corner is because the book board has some thickness to it. And once we cut this off, I will wrap that little corner right around the corner of the book board, and it'll actually get captured inside of the fold. So I'm going to then cut right along my Sharpie lines, and they don't have to be perfect. Really, the most important thing is you have a little bit of distance there. I'll do that on all 4. Right now, the glue is drying really nicely, but my board is curving a little bit. But as I mentioned, because we're going to glue the paper, it will then curl right back to a flat board, and we will be flattening this overnight as well. So I now have all of my corners cut, and I'm ready to continue working with my glue. So I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm going to add my glue here, add my glue here, 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 here and here, and then I'm going to do a nice job of spreading that glue out. Now this is where you do want to be careful that the glue doesn't get on the front side of your paper, because that actually will be seen and it'll just look messy and kind of sticky. So you want to just avoid getting any glue on the very front side of the paper as much as possible. All right, at this point, you want to do it in this order. You're going to pull and push this side down. What I'm doing here is I'm actually going to use this palette knife and kind of pull. It's kind of stretching the paper, so it's getting a really flat and flush line there. There's no wrinkle, it's just really flat. Doing the same thing here. So this would normally be done with something called a bone folder in bookmaking, but we didn't have those, so this kind of works just the same. Wipe away any extra glue and just make sure that you've pushed really hard across the whole thing with your palette knife. And then this is where you're going to use the little point of your palette knife and kind of tuck that little corner in right up against, again, kind of like wrapping a present. And then what that will allow is that corner will tuck really beautifully in and around the corner of your book board. And once again, I'm going to pull really nicely with my palette knife so I get a really flat surface. So I've wrapped it, and my corners have paper on them as well. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. And I'm working kind of quickly because the glue does dry well and quickly. You don't want it to be too sticky when you're working with it. You still want it to have some moisture within it. So you want to kind of keep moving. If you feel like you can only tackle one at a time, that's fine as well. Come back and do the second one later once you feel confident on the first one. So once again, you start with your short sides first, and I'm using that palette knife to just kind of pull and push along there, really getting it to stick well. Doing the same thing here. Notice I'm really pulling, I'm kind of tugging on the paper. Fortunately, this is book paper. The whole point is that it has some fabric in it, little tiny threads of fabric, so it makes it stronger. I'm tucking those little corners in so they're just little triangles, and I'm pulling on this as well. It's nice to start kind of in the middle and kind of work your way out. You'll notice it will kind of curl a little bit. So pull as best you can to flatten it as you go. Again, it will start to curl, but we're going to put some inside paper on here in just a minute. So I now have both my front and back covers right here and right there. Okay, at this point, I'm ready to kind of set these aside for now. And in the meantime, I'm going to find my two inside shapes. What I need to double check is my measurement. So I'm now measuring the inside from the dots out, which is 5.5 by a little under 9. So I'm going to do about 8.5, 8 3/4 by a little under 5.5. So I'll just write that down so that that is noticeable. So let's go with 5.25 by about 8 3/4. Okay, that's what you want to measure out. So since I'm using both sheets of paper, I'm going to measure them the exact same length. So as I mentioned, 8 3/4, and I'm putting 2 dots down so I can make a nice straight line. One of the things that I like doing with a ruler is I can cut with scissors, or I can just do something like this where I actually tear so it looks a little bit more like handmade paper. I kind of like that raw edge on there. And then I want to measure my other distance. So there was my 8 3/4, and now I'm going to go with my 5.25. And I'm putting 2 dots just so that my line is nice and straight. It also allows me to hold onto my ruler and then tear one at a time. You can also just use scissors, but this is just kind of a fun thing that printmakers and bookmakers do. Now I can kind of test it out and see, sure enough, that fits nicely right in there. And then this one fits nicely right in here. So I'm going to glue those in, and you can see there's a tiny little border around. So I'm going to set those aside and glue both of my inside sheets before I prepare for my coil, which will be part of the connecting of the pages. You can use a little less glue on this because it does have some moisture that will travel through the paper. And again, concentrate on getting the glue to the outside edges as much as possible, kind of painting along the outside edges so that you get everything to adhere really, really well. All the way around to the outside edges, to my corners. And then making sure that middle has some glue in it as well. I'm just going to do this little edge a little bit more here. Didn't quite have enough glue. All right, see that? I've got glue everywhere. And then you want to work fairly quickly. So I'm now going to put this down. I'm going to put my raw edge next to my holes and just kind of center it. Make sure it looks exactly the way I want it to look, just like so. Push that down. This is a good time to use your ID, and then I can push that out really smoothly. You can use your palette knife, but it just doesn't have as big of a surface, so you have a little bit bigger surface with that one. I'll do the same thing here. I'm putting my raw edge near my holes. And then once again, just pushing, trying not to tear the paper, although this is pretty tough paper. It would take a lot of effort to tear it. But I now have two. One's my cover and one's my back. And you can decide which one's your front and your back when you'd like. And those are ready to be flattened overnight. So I'm going to go ahead and do that with some heavy books and just let it sit overnight. You want that moisture to evaporate from the actual paper and then make it into a book. So I'm putting really heavy. I've got a couple books here and I'm putting them really heavy. I'm going to sit that overnight. And then when that's done, I will show you the next step. Okay, everyone, we have now let this sit overnight, and what I have prepared is I have all of my pages. I stack them so that you can see the holes through each of them. I have my coil, and I have some binder clips. They're not necessary, but I find that it's a little bit easier to hold things together if you have them. If you don't, you could use rubber bands. So now I'm ready to remove my books and set those aside. Also, just a reminder, when you're done with the glue, to make sure that you wash your brush out really well, and don't forget to put the little cap on the glue because otherwise it will dry from the top and inside. So now you're going to line up visually your holes with the book board holes and determine what's going to be your top or your front. It doesn't matter technically because you can just flip it over, but make sure that everything is lined up really well for you. From top to bottom, all the way around, and make sure there is a direction that the pages go. I'm noticing mine seem to be upside down here. So there we go. They will line up perfectly with the book board. Just make sure you flip them the right way. So now I have all of my holes lined up, and I am going to clip it with the binder clip so that it stays in place. So I'm going to clip here, and then clip here. Again, if you don't have binder clips, you could use a rubber band or you can just hold it with your hand. Now, very simply, you're going to use the hole at the top and the spiral starts, and then you're going to just thread it into the book. And it's very simple. You could just keep going. It's kind of fun to watch it go. It's perfectly aligned, so it'll wind right in there for you. And you'll see that it'll hold it really nice and tight, and you've got all the flexibility of opening the book fully. And what's really neat about this is that this is such a simple step, but all of a sudden you have a complete book, and that's what's fun about it. I hope you all can come up with some creative uses for it, whether you use it as a photo album, sketchbook, a journal, maybe just a place to write some ideas down. All right, easy enough. Look at that. So you'll notice the spiral is a little bit longer. Very simply, you can just clip that. I always kind of make sure that my spiral hits the back on this end here, and then I just snip it with my scissors. Easier said than done. My scissors are not so great. There we go. All right. And then I'll undo my binding clips. And this is when you can open your book and start to use it. And it looks like a real legit book, which is pretty fun. A little bit of glue there. All right. So good luck and have fun making your book. Very fun process.